you and I have been asking these same questions regarding the growth of precision medicine for a long time. We're looking for the tipping point, and the persistent question that we have is, where's the market disruption going to come from, right? To drive NGS testing to be done at economies of scale, right? They're easily accessible. And when we spoke years ago, we both believed that this disruption is going to come from the patient community in driving demand for it. And that's what I see the cancer patient lab, doing. Is that the idea?
It is exactly. So again, I'm a management thought leader by background, and written a whole bunch of articles for the Harvard Business Review. And there's work done by a man named Clayton Christensen. He was a friend of mine, um, and he wrote about disruption. So how do you disrupt an established industry that's very um, I'll just say, I could come up with a nicer way of saying it, but fat, dumb, and happy. In other words, they're comfortable with the status quo. And so, how are you going to get an industry that's happy with a status quo going to change? And the examples, whether it's Airbnb or Uber or what have you, disruption comes from the outside by startups who are working with empowered customers. And so, there are two ways. If you believe, as I do, and you do, that the way we do healthcare today needs to be disrupted, that the adoption of innovation is too slow, and there are a lot of things that are broken in the system that need to be fixed, then the approach that's going to do that on a rapid basis. Now, the incumbents in the system, whether they're pharma, payers, providers, they are going to improve slowly and incrementally, and unusually slowly in healthcare because it's a very conservative industry, which depends on the randomized clinical trial for improvement. Um, but if you really want rapid change, which is what patients, if you want to bend the curve to what's possible, whether it's precision medicine, you said DNA sequencing, I would add RNA sequencing, proteomics, liquid biopsies, functional testing, and on and on and on. There are a whole lot of diagnostics that could help inform patients, but the adoption of those diagnostic technologies is glacially slow because of the characteristics of the system. Then it's going to be startups that'll do that, and it's going to be empowered patients. So the Cancer Patient Lab is designed to get those patients empowered, to get them to get better outcomes, to showcase when they get better outcomes, and to show the world that if you get engaged and you get access to these more cutting edge diagnostics, that you're going to get better outcomes. The other side of this, and that's the Cancer Hacker Lab, is an
Yeah.
accelerator for startups to. So I'm trying to do two things: is to encourage disruption, help the patients get up to speed, so they, lobby for either with their caregiver, their doctors, or with the system generally, to say, I want access to these novel diagnostics. At the same time, supporting the startups that are offering those new services.
So you've got a massive effort. So it's bottom up from uh,
Yeah.
educating the consumer patients to demand services, but it's also top down to help inform innovation in how to strategically, launch or approach the market with something that can scale or that is, more easily adoptable in the marketplace. Is that correct?
Yeah, the characterization I would use is outside in.
Mm.
We're really doing it as outsiders to the medical system, to then come to the medical system and demand or ask for or request the things that we think are best for us, and thereby reform the system by coming with what we think are the best treatments for us.
So when you put on your process reengineering hat and you look at the current system and the way that products these many different services, as you mentioned, we talk about precision medicine. Precision medicine is more than just gene sequencing. It's more than just oncology, even though cancer care is where it's used most robustly. But when you put that process reengineering hat on, where do things go wrong in the process of either drug or product delivery from innovation to patient access?
So, as a process, as you say, as a process consultant, as a process reengineer, I'm looking at what is the process that we're trying to reengineer? Who's the customer and what's the process? And basically, I would submit to you that there are two processes that we're talking about: testing decision making and treatment decision making. And those are um, currently embedded in the way that people get the answer to those questions. Is they, in the current process, they go to their doctor, and their doctor tells them what tests they should get and tells them what treatments they should get. And what we're trying to do is expand that in the same way that you would get a second opinion on both of those decisions. You would also potentially get a crowd opinion on both of those decisions, right? And so it is not about drug discovery. The process of drug discovery is outside of scope for me and for us. That is, drug discovery is the beneficiary as a pharmaceutical company or an academic researcher who's creating a drug, a new therapy that's going to make the world better. It's going to, and that's wonderful that is being done, but that's not what any of what we're trying to be involved in. That is, that process needs to be re-engineered. We could go into how that could be re-engineered, but that's not what we're about. What we're about is those things create the universe, the menu of options of possible treatments that patients could get access to, and that they're confronted with a question: which of those should I get access to, given my unique situation, personalized to me, with my unique profile, my genomic profile, my medical history, et cetera? Which of those possible options out there is best for me? And as you will know, one of the biggest challenges is that with all of these new diagnostic tests, often those best test for me, or excuse me, best treatment for me is what is called off-label, meaning there was not a randomized clinical trial that was done for my profile that is best for that drug. So let's say I have lymphoma, I do a functional test, and lo and behold, there's an asthma drug that kills my cancer. And now I want to use that asthma drug to treat my cancer. That's an off-label use. The drug is safe. It's been proven to be effective for asthma, but nobody's ever applied it in my case. And so that's the territory we get into, which is a question of access to off-label or other types of treatments that are not within that standard of care in the NCCN guidelines.
Yeah, that's it. Kind of when you were talking about the two components of first testing, and one of the rate limiting factors of adoption has been many times the tests are not reimbursed, and the therapy on the other side of that. And there's just seems to be no consensus within the industry because many times there is a $3,000 genetic or genomic test that can unlock access to a $350,000 therapy, and many times the therapy can be paid for, but they will not consistently pay for that diagnostic. Um, do you think in a process reengineering standpoint, tools like AI or clinical decision support, natural language programming that can pick up these elements out of a patient chart can have the ability to streamline access or at least to accelerate access in the future?
Yeah. So there are at least two answers, maybe more, to that dilemma. And I'm working on a startup that would address some of this, the access question, access to the test. One is, why do we need reimbursement? Like, the U.S. is uniquely in the world and I guess other countries that have national health systems. You only get the test that is in the standard protocols, that is in that either that reimbursement by insurance companies in the U.S. or the national health system. But there are countries in the Middle East, in India and China, where there's a retail culture about healthcare. You pay. I was wandering in a small village in Sikkim, and I stumbled onto a shop. I think there was a dirt road, and they were doing cardiac surgeries. It's like, okay, so you could walk in and get a heart surgery. It's like, in other countries and other places, there's a culture. So if you said it's $3,000 for the test, then the consumer would look at it and say, is it worth $3,000 to get that test? And you might say yes. Um, is that test $3,000 because that's the actual cost basis of it, or is it reflecting, some other things in it? If, and I'm sure you know about this, if this were a companion diagnostic, so a companion diagnostic is a test that tells you that you will be a likely responder to a particular drug. Would the pharmaceutical company build that in because it's going to increase the positive response to their pharmaceutical from 20% to 80%? Would they just embed that cost of that diagnostic in the pharmaceutical? Yeah, they probably would. Um, if so, our vision is that the cost is something that patients could handle, and maybe they're in India or China and they're high net worth people, at least initially. It's called the Tesla strategy, where you build the Roadster first, and then you eventually, it's just $100,000, and you eventually build the $30,000 version. You start with high net worth people who can afford to pay $3,000 for the test. You show that it works better, and then eventually everybody migrates to that. Volume increases and prices come down. Our idea is to get the decision making on navigation and diagnostics patients paying for out of pocket so that they are then in control and then shop for their actual treatment, their physical treatment. So if you're in a metropolitan area and you have a variety of health institutions that could deliver the treatment that you want, you go to the one that you choose. And so that shifts the power, which is currently all decisions basically revolve around the provider, whether you get a test, what treatment you get. And this shifts it to the patient deciding, which is the dynamic in every other industry. And so we're talking disruption, but in every other industry, the consumer, whether you're buying a car, whether you're buying a house, you decide what you're going to pay, and there's a market for that. That does not happen in healthcare for the very reason you're talking about the involvement of reimbursement through payers and guidelines and all the systems that are built into the current system.